Frank. What's the weirdest thing you've ever saw in here?
Let me ask you a question, kid. Did you see that movie, Night of the Living Dead?
Hey, we gonna party tonight or what?
Yeah, we are gonna party.
Well, where are we gonna party?
I don't know, somewhere.
Hey, we could go to the park.
Oh, no, we can't. The cops said they'd shoot us if we go back to the park. Yeah, and I ain't in no mood to go tonight.
I like death.
Greetings, ghouls, and welcome to Minute 15 of Do You Want to Party? A Movies by Minute podcast of the 1985 groundbreaking horror classic, The Return of the Living Dead. I'm your host, Troy, and joining me today is fellow retail buddy and one of the most prolific fans of horror that I know, and also returning for a second time. It's...
Hey, this is Horror Savvy / Ahmed / whatever you want to call me.
just as long as you put slash in there.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you for once again returning, sir. This
Oh,
is
no problem.
like I keep telling everyone, this is what the process is going to be. Doing a weekly basis, I might as well keep changing out people every single week. Like,
Yeah.
the regular movie by minutes that do it like 5 days a week, when I definitely do not have the the brain capacity to do that.
Yeah.
All right, so minute 15 starts off with, oh, let's do that, and ends with a frolic through the gravestones.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, the whole entire crew is in the 59 caddy by suicide that belongs to Suicide, and Trash is saying her line that while it seems to be the way that this character speaks, it sounds like it has a bit of a sarcastic tone to it, but that's obviously just the way the character is.
Yeah.
And we get the final shot of the gang in the car, like I said. Chuck, Spider, and Scuzz in the back seem very upbeat about the decision to go into the cemetery. Casey, or at the very least Jill Shepherd herself, is definitely not looking very thrilled, as she seems to be dealing with being crammed in the back seat. If you were watching like previously, it looks like she is like hunkered down in her seat, like she's like being crushed between everyone, crammed into that the four of them being crammed into a place that probably should only be having 3 people, but
Yeah,
still.
well, the way we used to drive.
Exactly. Suicide guns the engine, and Trash, who seems to be sitting sideways, or at the very least perched on the side of her door, mostly as not to block John Philbin, who plays Chuck, who is directly behind her. Also, Trash definitely is jazzed about the decision, where Tina, right in the middle front, looks to have a complete opposite feeling. Then we get a POV shot from Trash's angle as the car drives towards the bricked wall of the cemetery, aiming for the large metal gates under the archway entrance. Beyond the walls, a row of trees tower above the heavily graffitied walls. We then cut to a close-up of Tina and Suicide as an insert shot. Tina still doesn't seem thrilled with the current situation. Well, she turns from glancing at a smirking Suicide. From there, we get a great look from Beverly Rudolph, who we get to look at a great close-up of Beverly Rudolph with her eased up bangs, her pink lipstick, her plastic neon pink coiled hairband, her long hanging earrings that end in like a pearl drop, this chunky white necklace, and her fabulous popped collar. So, I mean, this is pretty much the first like close-up shot that we've been able to get of Tina in the movie to this point. It's always been in a giant scene, so it's always had the whole entire cast in it. So it's kind of neat. We then cut back to Trash's POV as the car is much closer to the cemetery wall. We see the overgrown foliage creeping over the top. We see clearly now there is 2 smaller entrance doors to either side of the large main entrance. A lot of the details of graffiti can be seen, while much technically really can't be made out, but
there's some interesting graffiti going on there.
There's a lot of stuff.
You got No Future blasted across the doors, right? And then you've got like Bob 1983 written over top of it.
Okay, so I was just about to mention that, and
Yeah.
I thought originally it said Bob 1988, which kind of weird seeing the movie takes place in 1983.
Yeah.
But apparently that is a five. It's a
Mm.
1958, which seems kind of weird
Ah,
to have spray paint from a 58 there. But yeah,
that's even more weird because it
I
totally
know.
looks like an eight.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
I was able to get a high quality res of the just the doors themselves. It's just
Mm.
that like one shot where you can see all the detail in the doors, which is kind of and it turns out it's a five, which is kind of
Okay.
weird because I had, like I said, originally I thought it was an 88, right? And
Yeah.
which seemed a little weird for the time that this movie actually takes place. Um, so yeah, we got black bubble text of suck covering part of the no future on the left door, while
Yeah.
slacker, which is spelt SAC with a big R, partly covers it on the right side of the door.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah,
I
there's
like the what does it say?
which
We
one?
don't care on the
Yep,
door.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
no one home is on one of the other
yeah, one of the
smaller
pillars of
doors.
the
Yeah,
arch there.
yeah. Oh, on the pillar. Sorry, yes, on the pillar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other door says go home, it looks like it says, but I
Yeah.
can't tell for
Yeah,
sure.
exactly. It's obscured from almost every single angle. You can't see
Yeah.
the whole
And the other
entire
pillar just
door.
says sex.
Yeah, with the
So this
that's the
was
one with the
possibly
giant
done by
pigs.
real teenagers.
Well, it's obviously well, a lot of the actual I guess you can call it handwriting. The style all seems to be similar
Yeah.
because if
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
look at a lot of the spray paint that is on Suicide's
Hmm.
car and the original wall that the
They just
group
got
was
one guy to
walking
do the
by,
whole
yeah, they
thing.
got one guy to do the whole thing, or at least maybe two at most, and all
Yeah.
that. So yeah. Um, so the next shot we have our group unloading themselves. Suicide and Tina get out the now open driver's side. Scuzz pushes the driver's seat forward, so him and Spider, who Spider himself takes a sip of another swig from his bottle and then spits out the contents. Um, for a distance shot, just as a not as a he doesn't like the taste, he just is doing it to be, a punk teen.
Mhm.
Once he's out, we find out he's got also a six-pack of cans in the old style plastic rings.
Yeah.
The sound of a passing train can now be heard.
Well, I think the most interesting exit of the car there was Linnea Quigley, the trash.
Exactly.
She's
Yeah.
sliding over the windshield and then over the hood of the car and then
Yep.
edging her way to the front to get out. I've never seen that before. That's new to me.
Exactly. Yeah. Still in the back, Chuck climbs over the passenger side the passenger side of the car.
Yeah.
He then turns to retrieve his boom box. Also, when she stands up, Casey then grabs a big bottle of red wine that was behind
Hmm.
her. It was obviously sitting in the little cloth broken down section of the convertible right
Yep.
next to Chuck's boombox. So while all but Suicide, who has gone to the trunk, gather in front of the doors, which are locked by a chain and lock, we cut to Suicide unloading a gray wooden box and a ball peen hammer from his trunk. He
Hmm.
then approaches the group, having a conversation. Note at this point, all of the voices sound like they're live on site recordings, except for Casey. Jules Shepard's delivery of I Just Want to Party is definitely, well, more of a whiny sort of thing, sound,
Yeah.
is definitely ADR'd, which is additional dialogue recorded later on. It just has that canned sort of sound to it
Yeah.
that is a little different than everyone else's at this particular moment. When Suicide swings his ball peen hammer to break open the chain, watch Chuck and Scuzz at this particular sequence. While the others barely react, Scuzz jolts his body in surprise of Suicide's actions, and Chuck starts looking around, concerned that someone might have heard the noise. So I'm not 100% sure if this is like an acting choice and everyone else decided not to act for it, or the actors just decided to put a little more into their performances than everyone else, but it definitely looks like they're reacting to something that they hadn't realized was
Yeah.
going to happen. But everyone else was all like, it's obviously a suicide sort of thing to experience.
Hmm.
So now we cut to the inside of the gate that Suicide pushes open and enters, closely followed by Trash, who has a mischievous smile on her face. Skuz, who seems extremely excited to be in a cemetery, because as we heard, this is his first time that he's been in a cemetery. Only reason is because he's never known anyone that's died so far. That's soon going to change.
Yeah.
Spider and Casey, who is cradling her giant wine of bottle, enter next, followed by a nervously looking back Chuck, ghetto blaster still in hand. The cemetery is tightly packed with old tombstones, overgrown plant life, and plenty of garbage. Trash
Yeah.
gleefully prances on. Spider remarks that the condition of this place reminds him of Scuzz's place, and as they continue, we finally see that Tina is pulling up the rear.
Yeah.
And that's where this particular minute ends. If we look at the exact second, we get a quick glimpse close up of Chuck's ghetto blaster just
Yeah.
before it's about to cut, and we don't get anything else. It's just like just enough to see, hey, we're about to listen to some tunes, but we just don't get
Yeah.
the tunes
Not yet.
more in the next minute
Yeah.
on that. Yeah. So this is another great further introduction to these characters. We got a little brief one of some chatter and all that sort of thing. Now we're getting some more interaction and all that, how they work in their environment and how they play off with each other. I mean, this whole entire sequence from Suicide picking everyone up to this point is just another way to flesh out these characters, and it makes them seem, again, like I keep saying, it makes them seem more real, more plausible to exist in this universe and all that.
Yeah. No, it's interesting the way they kind of have. There's like a classic 80s way to show like punk teenagers.
Yep.
And whether you were watching a cartoon or real life in the movies,
Mm-hmm.
it was like, we got to give them spikes. They got to have some sort of cut
Yep.
off sleeves.
Yep.
You know, there's got to be chains, like actual chains.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I had mentioned this in the previous minute.
Yeah.
Uh, like the three of them are classic punks. Trash, Suicide, and Scuzz
Hmm.
are classic. Just from the out and out look of them. Um, Scuzz seems to be the most classical punk with
Yeah.
his long trench coat and all the
Yeah.
buttons and the even like the t-shirt with the tie and whatnot and all that,
Hmm.
the spiked hair. Um, Trash is the more costume sort of thing with her hair and whatnot and
Yeah.
her minimal look, but like she's still wearing like the pleather shorts and the long, which is kind of cool, the friggin' leg warmers that go all the way up, which is kind of
Yep.
neat. And how the way that Suicide looks is so describing Suicide is the perfect way to describe what a punk looks like, except for the fact that for what I believe to be probably the punkiest of the punks,
Mm.
he is too pristine. His leathers are completely like out of box. His chains
Yeah.
and his spikes are so shiny new. It's like they just like, oh, here's a great idea for a costume. Put it on him that minute and then started
Yeah.
shooting, right? There's no weathering to his costume, which that guy would definitely be in a worn
Mm.
in costume.
Yeah.
So it's just a juxtaposition of what everyone looks like. And then you got the other four characters who definitely don't look punk, but well, I mean, Spider is a little bit more on the punk side than anyone else,
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
but Casey is definitely like the Valley Girl sort of prep, and the preppy character is dressed up as Chuck, and the girl next door look what Tina has.
Hmm.
But again, they're all described as punks because they just hang out with punks, I guess. All right, so
Yeah.
over on the commentary track with director, writer Dan O'Bannon and producer designer William Stout, Dan O'Bannon points out the Resurrection Cemetery and then questions about the location of the train tracks behind the wall. William Stout confirms that and adds, if one's careful enough, the train can be seen in the background. Now, I have gone through this a couple of times after hearing that commentary. I'm like, oh, okay, let's see this whole entire sequence. Let's see if there's a train track. I don't see a train yet. It might be actually further on in the
Yeah.
movie, but I just scrubbed this whole entire sequence and all that. I didn't quite see any sort of thing. But like I said, you do hear the train going by, so it's definitely on the other side of that wall because you can hear it in the audio from the sequence.
Hmm.
Dan O'Bannon claims that and that was fine. So because obviously they built right next to the train track, which was located next to where the warehouse is. William Stout mentions how the arch of the cemetery entrance is all foam. He continues on about how the olive grove, which is where the cemetery is actually located, once they cleared it out, they took all the cutaway materials and brought it to this location and used them for the foliage used in the background to fill out the fake cemetery. When the shot changes to inside the walls of the door, as they open, Dan O'Bannon points out that the change of location. Now in Somar, William Stout confirms that and adds about being an olive grove. Dan O'Bannon mentions how in SoCal, there's no forests. Couldn't find any more than a patch of trees. They eventually found this olive grove and hung Spanish moss over the olive trees. William Stout ends it by saying, to make it look more southern, because of the location where this is supposed to take place, they needed to look more southernly, so they added the
Hmm.
Spanish moss to what they had as olive grove. That's where the commentary ends right now because that's where the minute does. But just a little sneak peek to the next minute is they mention the amount of tombstones that they actually had to rent to
Hmm.
fill out this scene, and they pretty much, I'll get into it in the next minute, but it's just they just pretty much rented every single tombstone that was available to them to flesh out this particular sequence. All right, so according to the script, story and screenplay by Dan O'Bannon, and this, again, the version we're using is the revised October 1983 version, which is obviously looks to be the final shooting because I couldn't find anything more recent to it. It's based on a story and script by John Russo, Rudy Rickey, and Russell Steiner. So, this is a little different than what we actually have in the actual movie. So, because just the way everything is situated in this particular sequence. So, as we get into in the movie, we have them stopping shy of the cemetery, having a conversation about picking up Freddy. Then they decide to drive to the cemetery. Well, in this particular version of the script, they're already at the cemetery, like close enough to the cemetery that they have a conversation about picking up picking up Freddy later on. The whole entire, oh, let's do that and all that sort of thing isn't in here because they're already at the cemetery store, because at the cemetery, it reads, they get out of the car and head towards the cemetery. Suicide gets a wooden box from under his seat, which obviously he gets from the trunk, not the under his seat. And obviously it's a much smaller box because that size box is probably not going to fit under the bench seat of a 59 Cadillac because there's not
Hmm.
really a lot of room underneath those giant seats
Yeah.
from that type of car. Isn't that sacrilegious? Tina says. Scuzz. Not if we're respectful. Chuck. We can see him come out when he gets off work, obviously. To him is them talking about Freddy, which was mentioned
Hmm.
a little further on, which is just pointed out because I didn't say it. Suicide then goes, all right, let's check this place out. They get out of the car and head towards the cemetery. Suicide gets a wooden box from under the seat. Chuck, what's that? Suicide, road flares. Chuck, what are you going to do with those? Tina, out of character, says, this is really rad. And Dee Dee, again, in this version of the script, Dee Dee turns out to be trash. And I believe it's meat that is actually turns out to be a spider. So Trash says, I like graveyards. They enter through the stone arch. So obviously in the script version, there is no locked gate. They don't have to bust it open or anything like that.
Yeah.
So we then cut to interior cemetery at dusk. They walk around and take a look at the place. This cemetery has been around for long enough to get overgrown, overcrowded, that the gravestone piles upon gravestones, monument on monument, and there are numerous crypts and tombs, little stone houses. It's a necronopolis, a city of the dead, which is kind of neat to see that the fact I believe it's the fourth or fifth Return to Living Dead has actually got the subtitle of Necronopolis, which is kind of neat.
Yeah.
And then Suicide says that this place is a mess. In the next line, which happens in the previous minute, in the next minute, it says that Meat turns on the portable tape deck really loud, which is kind of interesting because, again, Meat is Spider, and we know in the final movie, Chuck is the one carrying the actual ghetto blaster.
Boombox, yeah.
The boombox, yeah. So a few differences from what they obviously wrote and then decided to shoot. So yeah. With that in mind, I've been going into the comparison of the work print, which the work print seems to have a lot of the lines that are cut out of the movie but are still in the script, and sometimes they're a little different. As a comparison, the work script is much longer than the final film. And for this, from minute 14 to 15, which is what this particular minute is that we're talking about, in the work script, the sequence that compares to this minute is actually 15 minutes and 41 seconds to 17:01. So the work print has a different perspective. In the final cut, there is an insert close-up of Tina and Suicide, which is what I talked about when we got the close-up of to describe Tina's look. In the work print, they use the same setup shot for the two of them as Suicide states, "Let's go pay our respects," before starting up the car again. The shot of from Trash's point of view headed towards the cemetery entrance is a longer shot. So they basically follow the final film chops it up a little more, but this particular sequence goes a lot longer to get towards the door itself. And you can really hear how loud the engine of the 59 Cadillac is because there's no filter on this version. It's just the raw capture sound of the day. Also, the work print doesn't include the cutaway shot of Suicide getting the box out of the flares, so it's one continuous shot of everyone getting out of the car. You still see Suicide going around to the trunk to unload it, but there's no cutaway shot to actually seeing inside the trunk that Suicide is. Oddly enough, even this version, Casey saying, "I just want to party," in her whiny voice, sounds ADR'd as well. So I have no idea if that is actually Jewel Shepard's just the way her voice sounds or just the way her voice gets picked up on. Obviously it's I don't believe the actual actors were mic'd. Like sometimes, like nowadays it's so cheap to mic up a character to capture so you don't need a boom operator, right? So some distance is used of the recording of the on set sound. But yeah, it's just weird how Jewel Shepard voice still sounds like it's ADR, but obviously from what we have gotten from everyone else, it definitely isn't. Before they pass through the now open doors, Trash can be heard saying, "I like graveyards." The rest plays out the same up until Spider comments about Scuzz's place and how it reminds him of that. And that's what we got for minute 15. It's interesting to see how, especially this part of the movie, how everything has changed around slightly. Obviously, we got difference in characters from the script to the screen. They decided on changing names because they seem to fit a little better. But there we are. We're about to kick into gear, the movie. We still got about a few more minutes. Well, really soon, we're going to be seeing our first reanimated body. Spoiler alert. But if you're here, you obviously have seen this movie. There's no way
I can't imagine any listeners are tuning into this podcast and not knowing the movie.
Exactly. Especially a minute by minute. A minute by minute breakdown of a movie.
Very interesting way to experience the movie for the first time.
I mean, I will listen to a couple of horror podcasts, spoiler podcasts, where the whole entire single episode is about a movie where they spoil it. I have no problem with that. But yeah, a movie by minute, you're here because you're a fan. Yeah. All right, so as we finish up with the minute, we're just going to give a little bit of behind the scenes sort of information, all that. And this particular episode is being recorded a day late because we had set up to record the previous day, and then at the last second, Ahmed had remembered, oh wait, I have tickets to go see a movie. And
Yeah,
so
my bad.
because it's a very timely thing and it's something that actually gets released this weekend being the weekend of October 4th, 2024. Yes, that's right. I'm recording them week by week. I'm trying to bank some stuff over the next couple of days, but it's working out so far. So why don't you tell them why don't you tell 'em, the audience what you saw and what you thought of it?
Yeah. So I checked out a early release of Joker 2. Um, and there's a lot of negative reviews out there for it, which I'm having a lot of trouble understanding from people that would actually like, think out their response on how they enjoyed a movie, but at the same time, accepting of the fact that people just might not have liked it because as soon as it was announced that it was a musical, they very much just tuned out of it. And it is definitely not your average musical. Um, I can say that for sure. Now, if you saw the first Joker movie, which I'm sure a lot of you probably have by now, if you're
Well,
interested.
by the amount of money that that first movie made just in the
Yeah,
box office alone, yeah, a ton of people saw that movie.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it was very much a in-depth look into a delusional character's viewpoint, and what you think is actually going on is actually what he thinks is actually going on. But then they keep kind of tuning you back into the real world and how everything's actually being perceived around him. And it was really
that's
dark.
that's something that they played up in the first movie too, as well, right?
That's what
His
I'm still talking
yeah.
about, the
Oh,
first
this so
movie.
okay. Sorry, I thought you were talking about
Yeah.
this movie.
But
Okay, all
that's the
right
whole
then. Okay,
thing, is
yes.
that they actually continued that very well into the second movie.
Okay, good. All right, I
Now,
see.
if you recall the first one, I mean, he's singing and dancing and whatnot to himself, like kind of like the whole movie.
Mm-hmm.
So, not a shocker to anyone that actually paid attention that the second one in his delusions would actually be somewhat of a musical, because that is kind of what's going on in his head.
Right.
Um, and it was very well played how they kind of did that. And they weren't original songs, at least not for the most part, I don't believe. I don't think any of them were. But they were very much classic songs a lot of the time. And the way that they came in and out of reality with it was great.
Right.
Like, you didn't have like cast members like dancing in the background like Grease or anything like that. Like, it wasn't like a group sing along. It was very much just between himself and Harley. And that was it. No one else was experiencing this but them. And it was very much in their minds, mostly in his mind, actually, that you realize that in the movie. I'm not going to reveal anything, but the relationship between him and Harley Quinn is extremely different than what you get in your normal Joker movies. We're used to seeing the Joker kind of have an abusive relationship somewhat with
I see what you're
Harley.
getting at. I see. Yes.
Whereas
Okay.
in this kind of version, I don't want to spoil it, but Harley is not exactly who she always seems to be. Um, and even that they kind of pull off in a more realistic way than they do in the original, in the DC storylines. Um, Now, I don't understand people saying that it was a completely different tone and that, like, oh, nobody asked for them to do it this way. It's like, listen, I kind of went into this knowing it was going to be good for reason A, being Joaquin Phoenix just doesn't do sequels to movies.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
he is
literally yes.
a classy actor and a serious actor.
Mm-hmm.
He may be weird, but he's a serious actor. And that's not the type of guy who's going to go out there and be like, oh, I'm going to make parts 2 and 3 and 4 of like my movies. Like, his movies are very much one-off, just hits.
Yeah, pretty much.
And
Yeah.
if they're not hits, then they're somewhat of a cult classic. Like,
Yeah.
he's definitely like he knows how to play his roles. And I don't think he would have done this movie had he not looked at it and been like, this is great and original, and it's keeping the same tone as the first, but doing something all new. And they did that so well. and it was a very brutal movie, and it definitely played into like this whole like, oh, is it mental illness or is it just him? Like you don't even know. He doesn't even know. And it
Okay.
also, it reveals some stuff that they didn't reveal in the first one about his past, and they kind of get deeper into it. And a lot of people are just like, oh, it's a courtroom drama. And then there's so much more to it. And there's so much emotion and like passion behind the characters being played that I thought it was a great sequel. I like the first one better still, but if they were going to make a sequel to that movie, they did it right. They totally did it right. And what interests me a lot of the time, and not to get into like an overly opinionated matter on this, if you've ever tuned into my podcast, Standing in the Horror Section, you probably heard me talk about this in the last episode. But I'm seeing a lot of people that didn't like Joker 2 and thought it was such a different tone from the first one, but loved Beetlejuice, and said it was the same tone and kept the same thing up from the first one. And that I found really interesting because Beetlejuice, both visually, comedically, and just style wise, were entirely different than the first movie.
Yeah, yeah,
Right? It
yeah.
was it was it was something very like totally new and different for it. It didn't feel like the classic kind of Tim Burton kind of thing. And even the color scheme, like nothing was the same.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that might also be like the result of like the distance between the movies. I mean, just the
yeah,
way
I
to
mean,
make movies, but also the way Tim Burton has evolved in his way to do that sort of thing, to then try to go back to his whimsical, like Edward
yeah, I guess he
Scissorhands
just does.
sort
I
of,
don't think he
yeah,
has that in him anymore, to
yeah,
be
no, no,
honest.
nope,
And that's the kind of sad part about Beetlejuice. Like it had its fun aspects, but the intro, the characters, the character building itself just wasn't present at all.
no, I will definitely give you
No.
points on
It
that.
was
Yeah,
very much just like let's just do something goofy
yeah,
and that's it. And it was more like the Beetlejuice cartoon than it was like the movie.
but
Yeah, I
yeah,
found it fascinating that a lot of these people that I've seen online were like praising Beetlejuice for keeping the same tone as the first film.
no.
And then they're saying Joker 2 was like way different and they didn't like it. It fell flat. And I'm like, how do you see things? Is I don't understand how like you can see two things. And I guess a big part of Beetlejuice's success was playing the nostalgia card. Um, People so easily fall into the nostalgia stuff.
Yeah, no,
It
yeah.
doesn't have to be good. It just has to
Yeah, it
remind
has to be
you,
familiar. It
and
has to be
that's it.
familiar. Yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
as much as that movie was fun, it was a little painful to watch Michael Keaton being a senior Beetlejuice.
Yeah, yeah,
It kind of
exactly. Yeah.
reminded me of the Netflix movie that came out with Scorsese did with De Niro and
Oh
Pesci
yeah. Oof.
and he had de-aged
The
everyone,
the
and we were
Irishman.
seeing the Irishman
Yeah.
exactly. But yeah, anyway, like, I get it. I get the nostalgia factor, but like, yeah,
Hmm.
if you haven't seen Joker 2 yet, no spoilers, check it out. I think it's a great finale to the storyline that they were working on. If they were ever going to follow up, if you were curious to what happens to him after the ending of the first movie,
Right.
I think this is a great way to tell the story.
All right. So I want to thank you once again for joining me once for
Yeah,
minute 15. I want to thank the audience for joining us and all that.
thanks for having me.
If we were talking about anything that spikes your interest, be sure to check out Ahmed's. It's a YouTube, right?
Yeah, so I've got my horror savvy on Instagram. I've
Right.
got my YouTube slash Spotify slash Apple Podcasts, wherever, which is both video and audio. Standing in the horror section. Came back and recorded an episode just last week or so, for the first time in I don't know how many months, but we're gonna try and keep it up and come back because it's a really fun show to do. Yeah,
Okay,
we can
good.
have you
Well,
on there sometime. It'd be fun.
yeah, sure, yeah. I'd love to do that. I'll put a link to that account in the show notes, and everyone
Yeah.
can go check it out in both your Instagram and your YouTube.
Mhm.
And if there's anything that we were talking about that you want to talk to us about or expand on or correct us, send us an email at Gmail. Our Gmail is planetgeekpod at gmail.com. We can continue on the conversation there, or maybe even roll it into a future episode. And again, Amit, thank you again for joining me for minute 15.
No problem. You're
And
welcome.
the only thing I have left to say is
Adios.
see you next Wednesday.
You've just been listening to a Planet Geek production of Do You Want to Party? A Movies by Minute podcast of the 1985 The Return of the Living Dead. Please be sure to subscribe, download, comment, share, rate, and review. Be sure to follow us on our social media platforms: Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Tumblr, or Letterboxd. Search for Planet Geek Productions. X, former Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky, search for Planet Geek Pod. Or send us an email to planetgeekpod@gmail.com. Our closing music is provided by Night Chill. See the show notes for more details. Once again, thanks for tuning in, and farewell, fiends.
Wait, I just double check it. Yes, I am recording. Okay, good.
Yes, it told me you were, it notified me.
Okay, good. Greetings, ghouls, and welcome to minute 15 of Do You Want to Party? A Movies by Minute podcast of the 1985 groundbreaking horror classic, The Return of the Living Dead. Okay, and as I said, here is the person coming in. Okay, come on in. It's gonna make a little bit of noise as she comes in through the back door.
That's okay.
Good timing, by the way. Just got like one line into the recording.
Sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, I could pause this at any time and whatnot, which I should have done now because now I'm gonna have to edit all of this conversation out. Yeah. All
At
right.
least it's the beginning, so it's not so
Yeah, no,
bad.
it's the beginning, and worst case
Yeah.
scenario, I could just start all over again on the first
Exactly.
line. Is that Georgie's boat?
Oh, yeah.
That is cute.
This is from Spirit Halloween.
Oh yeah, is that this year's?
They have it this year still, actually.
Oh, okay,
when I was there,
okay.
I saw it.
Alright.
But it was a few years ago.
Okay.
This is a
Gotcha.
popular item.
Yeah, no, that's cute. That's cute. Plushie
Yeah.
of the doomed boat.
Little pillows. Oh
I know,
my
I saw those. Yeah,
Yeah.
those are kind of cool. Those are kinda cool. All right, so let's take 2 on this. All right.
Yeah.
Meat turns on the portable tech. Let me try that again.